Arthur is a tyrannical king who rules over the world with an iron fist. During his ascent to the throne, Arthur slaughtered his enemies, nuked cities, and committed countless atrocities, all in the name of power. But one day, he reflects on all the things he has done. He is overcome with a sense of guilt, and in the next moment, he dies of a heart attack. As he is slowly descending into the abyss, a voice calls out to him and says it will give him a second chance at life, so he had better not mess it up this time. A few moments later, Arthur opens his eyes and finds two people looking down at him. The man says his name is Reynold, and he is Arthur's father, while Alice overhears his mother. They don't really expect their newborn baby to understand what they are saying, but they are so excited to have him. Arthur slowly comes to the realization that these people really are his parents, and he was just born a minute ago. He's still finding it hard to believe that he's a baby again, but he can't deny that his parents are really good at taking care of him. Overall, he is pretty happy, but he still doesn't like the fact that he is stuck in a baby body. He's got an oversized head, he can't speak, and every couple of hours he shits his diaper involuntarily, so he has lost all control. But then he notices something that's even stranger than his current circumstance. He watches as Reynold channels energy into his fists and proceeds to smash a boulder to pieces. Arthur is amazed because this is a power that he knows nothing about despite all his years as the ruler of the world. This feat is apparently quite an impressive one. So Reynold is proud of himself and turns to his family so they can praise him, but he fails to pay attention to his surroundings, so a rock falls straight into his head. Alice was worried something like this might happen, so she then goes over to him and starts using magic to heal Reynold's injury, but she warns him to be more careful next time he wants to show off. Reynold may have just been trying to show off, but when he gets serious, those fists are no joke because he can easily one-shot a wild boar when he goes out hunting. And having him around makes things a lot easier for his party members. By the time the hunting trip is over, Reynold returns to his family and is ready for a welcome-back hug, but then he remembers that he is still covered in boar blood, so he's going to have to get cleaned up first. Arthur has learned two things from seeing this. One, this world is so dangerous that it is common for people to own weapons for their protection. And two, he's going to have to learn how to fight if he wants to live freely in this world. Now that Reynold is back, Alice says it's time to put Arthur down for a nap, and normally he'd be upset about being treated like a baby, but this is one part he actually enjoys. Back in his previous life, he rarely ever got the chance to sleep peacefully because people would always try to assassinate him when he least expected it. Of course, he could easily defeat any attackers that came after him, but it was incredibly stressful. Months pass, and Arthur's baby limbs are finally strong enough to allow him to move around on his own now. The first thing he does with his new mobility is go over to a mirror so he can take a long, hard look at himself. His parents think it's cute that Arthur is so mesmerized by his reflection, but he is just coming to terms with the fact that he really is a baby. Anyway, since Arthur can move on his own now, when Alice puts him down for a nap later that day, he sets his plan into motion. As soon as she leaves the room, he opens his eyes and throws his blanket out of the crib so he can climb down and escape his crib. He then proceeds to crawl across the floor while Alice is busy doing the dishes, and she must be really focused on those dishes because Arthur makes it all the way to the other side of the room without her noticing. Once he gets there, he opens the door to the house's library and pulls out a book because he needs to learn more about this world. After reading one of the books, he learns that this continent is called Dikathan, and it is divided into 3 kingdoms. The Dark Kingdom, a nation of dwarves that live in vast cave cities. The Eleanor Kingdom, a nation of elves who live deep within the forest. And the Sapling Kingdom, a kingdom of humans ruled by a king, although here no one ever nuked the cities to take over. Arthur still wants to learn more, so he pulls out another book and it gives him some much-needed answers. Arthur had noticed that the level of technology in this world is lacking, and the reason for that is the presence of magic. People are able to use magic by manipulating the mana within their bodies, and while it's not exactly common, magic is a huge part of life in this world. People can use magic in 2 ways, namely augmentation and conjuring. Augmentation involves circulating mana within your body, granting the user incredible strength, defense, and agility, while conjurers can project their mana outwards and use it to control any phenomenon they desire. That pretty much sums up the info about this world's magic system, but Arthur doesn't find anything about the healing magic Alice used earlier, so he assumes she must be an exception of some sort. From what Arthur can tell, most people manifest their mana when they hit puberty, and by channeling that mana through something called a mana core, one can learn to control it and become a mage. This is easy for Arthur to understand because in his previous life he rose to power thanks to the innate power of ki within him. It functioned the exact same way as mana, so he tries focusing all his energy to see if he can generate a reaction, and sure enough, his mana core begins to develop. This is a huge step forward in Arthur's development. Before he can do any more training, Alice finally finds him. She's been worried sick ever since she found out he wasn't in his crib, so she's glad he wasn't hurt. But while she's holding him up, she notices that something is different about him. Arthur is worried she might have sensed the mana within him, but she actually just noticed that Arthur pooped himself again. 2 years go by and Alice is writing in her journal one day. She is so grateful that Arthur is growing up strong and healthy. She's starting to grow a little concerned because she hasn't seen Arthur smile even once since he was born. Just then, she notices Reynold and Arthur outside, and it looks like Reynold is giving Arthur some sword lessons. Arthur seems pretty interested, but Alice is furious that Reynold would let a 2-year-old swing a dangerous stick around. By now, Arthur has realized that Alice isn't someone you want to get angry, so he's going to have to be careful not to make her mad. To avoid any other dangerous activities, Alice decides to take Arthur out for the day to show him around the town, and Arthur is particularly excited about this because it will give him a chance to gather valuable first-hand information about this world. He can discern the level of this nation's technology by looking at the weapons that are sold to the general public, and he also gets to see various substances that he has never encountered before. Best of all, he got to witness a mage casting fire magic up close, so overall, today's trip proved to be incredibly valuable for him. By the end of the day, Arthur's baby body is exhausted from all the activity, so he is struggling to stay awake, and Alice wants to put him down for a nap as soon as they get home. As limiting as this new life has been, Arthur has come to enjoy life with loving parents. In his past life, Arthur got dropped off at spawn with no starter kit, so he was forced to live his entire childhood in an orphanage, and never got to experience parental love, so this is a nice change of pace for him. Arthur soon falls asleep on Alice's shoulder, so she starts carrying him to his crib, and along the way, she tells him how proud she is of him for learning so much. She has noticed all the times he sneaks out of his bed to read books, and she saw how excited he was to see the outside world, so she is sure he has an adventurous spirit. She assumes he must have gotten that from Reynold, and sooner or later, Arthur is bound to want to leave home to see the world on his own. Personally, she would prefer it if Arthur lived a peaceful life here, but as long as he is happy, she will support him no matter what. The next day, Arthur is standing by the window and watches as Reynold begins practicing in the front yard. He is interested in seeing the applications of magic up close and personal again, so he eagerly watches as Reynold begins circulating mana within his body. Eventually, rocks begin to fly up from the ground, and Reynold makes it seem like it's the greatest thing in the world, but in reality, it is pretty pitiful. This is the limit of Reynold's skill when it comes to conjuring, but that's because Reynold's specialty is augmentation, so his magic is much more efficient when he sticks to using it within his body. Seeing his father's power motivates Arthur to go do some training, but just when he's about to climb down from the table, Alice tells him it's time for his nap. Arthur still can't speak yet, so he starts whining as they pass the bookshelf, but Alice tells him he needs to take a nap, so there's no time for books right now. Normally, there would be nothing Arthur could do about this, but he recently learned a legendary technique: pouting. Arthur has mastered the art of weaponizing his cuteness as a baby, so even though Alice still wants to put him down for a nap, she eventually relents and just lets him read his book. Once Arthur is alone, he begins practicing with his mana core, and over the past 2 years, he has managed to get pretty good at it. By gathering various fragments of mana within his body, he was able to generate a mana core within himself, and although it was incredibly strenuous, it was well worth it. Now, with just a little more effort, he should be able to cast his first spell, but Arthur drastically underestimates the strength of his mana and accidentally blows up the house. Alice and Reynold were outside when the explosion happened, and it was so huge that Reynold's back gets burnt up really bad, but he and Alice are otherwise alright. However, they soon realize that Arthur was still in the house when it blew up, so they rush inside to check if he's still alive. There's no way a baby could have survived an explosion of that magnitude, but when Reynold reaches the library, he is shocked to find that not only is Arthur completely unharmed, he was also the source of the explosion. He's barely 3 years old, so it shouldn't have been possible for him to use magic until he was at least 12, yet Arthur is already practically a master of mana. He stands proudly and looks at his parents, but he forgets that the house is falling apart. So when 2 roof beams fall straight towards him, he is completely caught off guard. He tries running away, but his stubby baby legs fail him, so it looks like he's done for. Fortunately, both Alice and Reynold rush in to save him, and while Alice shields him with her body, Reynold uses his magic to block all the debris and save them both. Arthur is a bit shocked since this is the first time anyone has ever risked their life to save him, but Alice is so relieved that he is alright that she starts crying. Arthur still isn't used to having people care about him like this, so seeing her cry makes him cry as well. He never could have done something like this in his old life because he was expected to be a ruthless king. At one point, a man tried to assassinate Arthur, so after he was caught, the entire council assembled and prepared to sentence him for his crimes. And on top of that, they plan to ship the man's wife and son off to a camp that has never heard of the Geneva Convention, so they are doomed to be tortured and experimented on, because why not? The man begins to beg Arthur to spare his family because they don't deserve to suffer for what he did. And as an act of mercy, Arthur decided to kill him on the spot. That was basically an average Monday for him back then, but now he spends his Mondays training with his father. Reynold wants Arthur to try practicing with gauntlets, but Arthur already has a lifetime of sword experience, so he's not switching his main weapon. Since Arthur is so insistent on using a sword, Reynold decides to use one as well, and to make things a little more interesting, he's going to reinforce his sword with mana. However, to his utter shock, Arthur does the exact same thing and cuts through Reynold's sword with ease. After seeing this, Reynold realized that Arthur is way too talented for him to train, so he is thinking of getting a professional teacher for him and goes inside to talk to Alice about it. Alice flat out says no to the idea because she can't stand the thought of sending Arthur to some random town just so he can learn. They had already talked about this, and Reynold was supposed to teach Arthur to fight while she would teach him about magic, but Reynold points out that Arthur managed to cut right through his sword during practice even though it was infused with mana, and the kid is still a toddler for God's sake. If he's doing stuff like this at such a young age, then who knows what he could be capable of in the future, so Reynold thinks it's important for him to have a proper teacher. Alice can't deny that Arthur is unnaturally talented, but she still hates the idea of leaving him alone at a school in the city, so she and Reynold start arguing over it for a few minutes because they can't come to an agreement. Arthur is getting sick of all the arguing, so he points out that they can just come with him to the city, that way he can still get a teacher, and his parents won't have to leave him alone. The two of them hadn't realized that was an option, but it solves all their problems, so they think it's a great idea. So they immediately start making preparations for the journey, and the next day, a carriage arrives to take them to the city. They will be traveling with some of their old friends, and Arthur recognizes them because they are the ones who helped Alice and Reynold rebuild the house after he blew it up. They are all in a party called Twin and Horns, and the leader, Adam, introduces himself to Arthur. Angela introduces herself as well while simultaneously introducing Arthur to her chest and nearly choking him out. And Alice is happily watching it happen. Luckily, before Arthur passes out, Durden gets him away from Angela and introduces himself as well. But he is a bit more gentle and just gives Arthur a high five. Arthur then notices a girl standing on top of the carriage, and you know she's trying to Aura farm because there's no reason to be standing on the carriage right now. She doesn't say anything, so the others tell Arthur that her name is Jasmine, and the final member of the team is Helen, the archer. Since the introductions are finally done, the group needs to get moving, so they all climb into the carts and head out. Along the way, Alice asks Arthur if he is excited about his first big trip, and Arthur says yes, but internally he is thinking about how primitive this world is. They still use horse-drawn carriages to travel here. While in Arthur's old world, he had an entire fleet of flying cars he could use at any time. After traveling for most of the day, the group decides to take a break for lunch, so they set up camp, but as soon as they stop, they are attacked by wolves. Although these wolves are pretty dumb because they didn't even try to surround the group, they just charged straight in and got bodies by the team of adventurers in an instant. Arthur finds the whole display interesting since this is the first time he has seen real combat in this world, and he intends to become strong enough to handle threats like that on his own soon. Since they got a lot of dead wolf meat now, the group decides to cook it for dinner tonight, but they got no spices, so it's just gonna be plain grilled meat. Just then, Alice notices that Reynolds' arm is slightly injured, so she offers to heal it for him, but before she does, Jasmine tells her to wait a moment. All the others gather around Alice to keep a lookout because healers like her are incredibly rare in this world, so if someone were to see her using healing magic, then she could end up being targeted for it. Once Alice is done healing Reynold, everyone goes back to what they were doing before, but Adam decides he wants to get a little exercise before he goes to bed, and there's no better way to do that than by fighting a 4-year-old. Seems like a jerk move, but Adam has heard about how strong Arthur is and he just wants to see for himself, so this is just a practice match. Adam tells Arthur to get ready, and he has already imbued his spear with mana, so Arthur does the same. As the match begins, Arthur channels some magic into his feet, so just as he is about to clash with Adam, he vanishes and reappears behind him. This would have been the perfect chance for Arthur to strike, but his stubby toddler feet slip on the ground, so he loses his footing and Adam gets a chance to recover. Arthur and Adam then begin clashing, but I'm pretty sure the animation budget must have had negative values. Anyway, Arthur gets knocked back since his toddler body is too light to keep up with the seasoned adventurer, so it gets knocked into the air. Luckily, the others save him before he hits the ground, and they all start yelling at Adam for nearly hurting Arthur, but Adam says he couldn't help it because Arthur was too strong for him to hold back. There's no way a toddler should be capable of such strength, so he thinks Reynolds must have been giving him some kind of super soldier training, but in reality, he never actually taught Arthur to do any of this stuff. He just learned it on his own. Just then, Jasmine walks up to Arthur and startles him by accident. She was really impressed by Arthur's fight, so she asks him to teach her how to do that thing with the magic in his feet. Arthur was hoping to keep his technique secret since it is something he mastered in his past life, but she's not taking no for an answer, and from the look in her eyes, she's going to pester him relentlessly until he caves, so he may have to teach her eventually. The next morning, the journey continues as planned, and along the way, they take a few breaks to relax. During these breaks, Adam gives Arthur a few basic spearman lessons, and Helen teaches him how to use a bow a few minutes after that. And with a few basic lessons, he is able to figure it out pretty quickly. The only weapon knowledge Arthur has from his past life is with a sword, so these lessons are really valuable to him. And since he is learning so much from them, he decides to teach Jasmine his technique after all. By channeling magic into your feet and using wind magic at the same time, you are able to boost your speed tremendously. And after demonstrating it once, Jasmine is able to replicate it perfectly. Later on, Arthur is reading a magic book in the carriage, but for some reason, Jasmine is sitting there too and just staring at him. And it's not a coincidence either because she keeps taking every chance she can get to get close to Arthur. The next morning, Jasmine gives Arthur a knife as thanks for teaching her that technique, and it's clear that she really likes Arthur since she usually doesn't interact with people intentionally. A few minutes later, everyone gets back into the carriages and they continue through the journey, but as Arthur is reading his book, the carriage is suddenly attacked by bandits. They are being attacked by bandits and the carriage is completely surrounded, so there's nowhere for them to go. The bandit leader orders his men to capture the women and children so they can be sold as slaves, so all the bandits rush in and the adventurers do their best to hold them off. In terms of raw power, the Twin Horns and Reynolds are much stronger than the individual bandits, but there are way too many for them to defeat on their own, so sooner or later, they are going to get overwhelmed. At one point, Reynolds gets launched into the carriage by the bandit leader and he is badly hurt, so Alice wants to come to heal him. However, Reynolds tells her to stay away because if the bandits find out about her power, then they'll start targeting her, so instead he asks Arthur to take Alice and run as far away as he can. Arthur doesn't want to leave Reynolds behind, but Reynolds tells him that Alice is pregnant with another child, so protecting her should be a top priority. Arthur understands when Reynolds gives the signal, he prepares his magic to flee with Alice. And in the meantime, Reynolds says he will hold the bandits off. The bandit leader orders his men to go after Arthur and Alice, but Reynolds refuses to let that happen, so he charges in and clashes with him. The bandit leader managed to knock Reynolds down before, but this time Reynolds' family is on the line, so he's not going down easily. While Reynolds is keeping the bandit leader busy, a few of the more insignificant bandits try to go after Arthur and Alice instead, but Adam and Jasmine throw some daggers at them and take them out to clear a path for Arthur to escape with Alice. They are all doing their best to keep the bandits away from Arthur, and he is doing his best to get Alice to safety. It's honestly ironic how he spent his previous life taking things with no regard for others, and now he is forced to run away in order to avoid losing someone precious to him. After running away for several minutes, Arthur thinks they should be far enough from the bandits to be safe now, but he was wrong. One bandit is watching them from atop a cliff, and this one is capable of using magic, so he attacks Arthur and Alice with a wind spell. Arthur doesn't notice him at first, and by the time he does, the spell has already been cast, so the only thing Arthur can do is push Alice out of the way and take the hit alone. The wind blast knocks Arthur back, so he is going to fall off the cliff, and with his toddler body, that's basically a death sentence. However, if he's going to die, he's not going out alone, so as he is falling off the cliff, he takes the knife he got from Jasmine and throws it at the magic bandit. The knife hits the bandit and the string wraps around his ankle, so Arthur is able to use it to pull the guy down with him. The adventurers try to use their magic to save Arthur, but he has already fallen too far for them to reach him, so Arthur is doomed. As he falls to his inevitable death, Arthur looks back on his life, and even though he is going to die, he is filled with a strange sense of peace because he knows he managed to protect his precious family. He finally understands why that man in his past life was so desperate to protect his family. Arthur didn't even think twice about sacrificing himself to save Alice, and while he doesn't regret his actions at all, he still wishes he could have survived to live with them a little longer. After that deadly fall, Arthur somehow manages to get out of the river and make his way into a cave. However, he comes face to face with a terrifying monster, and he's starting to regret coming here for shelter. He tries to sneak attack the monster to increase his chances of survival, but the monster simply smacks him out of the air and tells him to calm down. It tells Arthur that it isn't evil and just wants to be friends, but the last time a stranger said that to me, I ended up in the back of a van, so I'm not sure Arthur should trust it. In any case, he is still badly wounded and his injuries aren't going to recover unless he eats something, so the monster starts picking fruits off the cave wall. It tells Arthur to eat the fruits, but he doesn't trust the random wall fruits, so he's about to get up to talk his way out of this. But just then, his injuries finally catch up to him, so as he tries to get up, he hears something snap and starts crying his eyes out. The monster tells him to stop crying because it's a miracle that he survived that fall in the first place. Arthur has a lot of things he wants to ask, but the monster tells him that it won't answer his questions unless he eats the fruits. He was hesitant at first, but after biting into the first berry, Arthur realizes that they actually taste pretty good. Once he is done stuffing his face, Arthur turns to the monster and asks it if it knows anything about his parents' current condition. The monster explains that it isn't able to leave this cave, so it can't check up on Arthur's family for him. But it does have an ability that allows it to see over a great distance, so it generates a screen and shows Arthur that his parents successfully defeated the rest of the bandits. That means they are still alive and well, and Arthur couldn't be happier to hear such good news. He thanks the monster for letting him know that his parents are still alright, and since Arthur is going to be stuck here for a while, he decides to be friendly with it. The monster's name is Sylvia, and she turns out to be a really nice person. Over the next few days, Arthur stayed here, ate, and rested so his injuries could heal, and all the while, Sylvia kept watch over him. Once his body had recovered, Arthur wanted to return home as soon as possible, but according to Sylvia, Arthur would never survive the journey home by himself. This cave is currently on the outskirts of the Elven Forest, and this part of the forest is filled with all sorts of magical beasts and immoral bandits, and Arthur simply can't handle all that. But that doesn't mean he's going to be stuck here forever. Sylvia has the ability to open a dimensional rift so she can send Arthur back home, or at least to a safer location than this forest, but it is going to take a long time for her to create the rift, so Arthur is going to have to wait until then. Since he has nothing better to do, Arthur picks up a stick and starts swinging it around to practice his swordsmanship skills. Several more days go by, and while Arthur has grown to enjoy Sylvia's company, he hasn't managed to learn anything about her. All he knows is she looks like a terrifying monster. She is apparently hiding from something, and she's a very kind person. After Arthur is done with his sword training for the day, he heads over to a rock and sits down so he can start training his mana. Sylvia is impressed that a child as young as Arthur already has a mana core, but she's sure that he never learned how to do this. She stretches out her hand and a large quantity of mana begins pooling in her hand. Arthur is amazed because Sylvia is basically accumulating mana while she's casting her spell, and if Arthur were able to learn such a thing, then he would undoubtedly become incredibly strong. With that said, before Sylvia even offers to teach it to him, she asks Arthur what he plans to do with the power he will gain from learning this technique. Arthur had never really considered it before, but now that he thinks about it, he recalls how his family and friends were all nearly wiped out because of some bandits. So he tells Sylvia that he will use his power to destroy anyone who dares to hurt his family. However, Sylvia doesn't like that answer, so she flicks Arthur on the forehead and knocks him back. She says she would never teach her technique to someone who thinks like that, but Arthur doesn't understand why she is so upset since it is perfectly natural to want to kill your enemies. Sylvia wants to prove a point, so she raises her finger to Arthur's head and tells him that she could easily split his skull open with it, or she could touch him gently. She asks Arthur which one he would prefer, and Arthur obviously doesn't want to die, so he says he would prefer the gentle touch. It's easy to let your actions be driven by anger and hatred, but once you give in, your life will become an empty, endless cycle of hate. She doesn't want Arthur to waste his life like that, so she asks him once more, what will you do with the power? Arthur thinks about it again, but this time he focuses on the bright smiles of the people close to him, so he answers that he wants to use his power to protect the people he cares about. And Sylvia likes that answer much more. Meanwhile, outside the cave, a monster that looks very similar to Sylvia seems to be tracking her down, and it is really close to finding her. Back in Arthur's old world, he was the king, but that didn't mean he held all the power. The people who were really in charge were the senators, so Arthur was basically just an agent of war to be called upon whenever the senators needed him to commit unspeakable acts of violence. But he never liked living that way. Back to the present, Sylvia is teaching Arthur how to use her technique, and after showing him how it's done, she asks him to try it for himself. Arthur begins condensing the mana in the surrounding air, and once he gets the hang of it, he is able to use that mana to power himself up. He can already feel the difference in his strength, so he runs over to Sylvia to thank her for teaching him. However, Sylvia suddenly senses someone approaching, so she knocks Arthur into a pile of rocks and tells him to stay quiet. Arthur has no idea what's going on, so he takes a look out of the pile of rocks and sees another monster that looks just like Sylvia. Sylvia seems to know who he is, and she is surprised that he managed to find her here, but the second monster doesn't want to waste time, so he demands that Sylvia come with him. However, Sylvia says nah, so he immediately starts blasting. Arthur wants to go help Sylvia, but he hears her voice in his head, telling him not to worry about her. The other monster tries to convince Sylvia to just cooperate with him because otherwise he will have to kill her. But Sylvia would rather die than listen to him, so she starts charging up her mana and reveals her true form. It turns out that Sylvia is a dragon, and in this form she is able to use much more power than before. She fires a huge blast at the other monster, so he blocks it, but he tells her she's being foolish because with the current state of her body, she won't be able to survive using that much power. Sylvia is well aware that she will probably die from this, but she doesn't mind because she has lived a long and happy life. She manages to push the other monster into a wall, but he isn't out of the fight yet, so he gets back up and starts raining several blasts on Sylvia. She takes a lot of damage from those blasts, but right now she is more worried about Arthur than herself because this fight is getting dangerously close to the place she hit him. The other monster launches one more blast at her and she can't dodge it since it would hit Arthur, so she uses the full extent of her power to intercept the blast and stop time temporarily. While time is stopped, she tells Arthur to come out of his hiding place. Arthur does as she says since it seems safe, and you would like to ask questions about everything that's going on, especially the fact that she's a dragon, but there's no time for that. Her time-stop power won't last much longer, so she needs to get Arthur out of here as soon as possible. She opens the dimensional rift she had been preparing, but due to her injuries and the fact that she didn't have time to properly finish the spell, the portal is connected to the middle of nowhere instead of Arthur's home. She was trying to avoid sending him into the forest since it would be dangerous, but she has no choice now. In any case, she is confident that Arthur can survive on his own and make his way back home with the technique she taught him, so she's not worried about his safety anymore. She once again asks him what he intends to use his power for, and without hesitation, Arthur answers, saying he will only use it to protect his family, so Sylvia is satisfied that he won't use his power for selfish reasons. Before he leaves, there are a few things she wants to give him, so she forms an egg and a feather in front of Arthur. She asks him to wrap the egg in the feather and cherish it well, and as a final parting gift, she imprints her will onto Arthur's body in the form of a mark on his arms. Arthur is confused by the fact that he suddenly got 2 full-sleeve tattoos, but Sylvia doesn't have the strength to explain it. She tells him he will figure out how to use it one day, but sadly she won't be there to teach him anymore. She also apologizes to Arthur because the truth is that she could have teleported him back to his family when he first got here, but she was just having so much fun with him around that she didn't want it to end. And now she ended up putting him in danger because of her selfish decision. Arthur feels terrible because he knows he doesn't have the power to save Sylvia from dying here even though she taught him so much. He doesn't care if she's a dragon or a monster. To him, she's a precious member of his family. He tells her he thinks of her as a mother, but Sylvia reminds him that he already has a mom, so Arthur says she can be his grandma then. Sylvia wasn't expecting him to say that, but she really likes the sound of being called grandma, so she asks Arthur to say it one more time, and he happily does so. Sylvia is really sad that she won't get to see Arthur again, but they are running out of time, so she nudges him forward so he can go through the portal. Arthur understands, so he takes the gifts she gave him and walks through, but at the last second, he changes his mind and starts begging Sylvia to come with him, but she can't do that, so she closes the portal and sends Arthur away. Time then resumes and Sylvia is hit with the blast from the other monster and the damage looks fatal. She collapses to the ground, but the monster isn't convinced that she is dead because it knows she is too powerful to be taken out by a blast like that. However, he lets his guard down while he is approaching her motionless body, and as soon as he is within range, Sylvia uses all of her remaining energy to fire a blast that incinerates him, along with everything in a 1-mile radius. As Arthur is being teleported, he hears one final message from Sylvia. She asks him if he remembers what she said earlier about the right way to use your power, and Arthur remembers, but he is still really sad about what happened. Sylvia tells him that the world is a sad place, so things like this will happen from time to time, but that's why Arthur needs to change it for the better. Arthur protests and tells her that there's no way he could do something like that, but she doesn't expect him to change the world immediately. He can do it one step at a time after all. This isn't his first time taking control of the world. Sylvia is aware of Arthur's past life as a king, and while she doesn't agree with how he ruled back then, she is sure that as long as Arthur doesn't let himself be consumed by hatred, he will become a great king who makes the world a better place. A little while later, Arthur wakes up on the floor and he swears that he will fulfill Sylvia's request, but before that, he needs to find his way out of this forest. After being teleported into the elven forest, Arthur begins his journey to return home. But while he is walking, he suddenly hears a blood-curdling scream from across the woods. It sounds like it's coming from a little girl, so he immediately gathers Mana in his feet and begins racing to check it out. He jumps up into a tall tree for a good vantage point, and once he is up there, he can clearly see a group of bandits kidnapping a little girl. She tried getting away from them, but the bandits have already grabbed her and are covering her mouth to stop her from screaming anymore. Since the girl is an elf, they plan to sell her as a slave on the black market for a huge profit as soon as they leave the forest, so they tie her up and stuff the girl in the back of their carriage. As Arthur watches the whole thing unfold, he has flashbacks to the moment he and his family were attacked by bandits as well. He recalls hearing the bandits mention something about keeping him and the women in the group alive so they could be sold as slaves later, and it really pisses him off. The first thought that comes to mind is that he should slaughter all the bandits for committing such a heinous crime, but he remembers what Sylvia told him about controlling his rage, so he takes a moment to think and calm down. He realizes that if he attacked right now, it would put the girl's life in danger, so he decides to be patient and wait for the right chance to strike. All the bandits get in their carriage to start riding out of the forest, and Arthur follows them closely from the shadows. By nightfall, the bandits are forced to take a break and set up camp since they can't travel in the dark, and Arthur is contemplating whether he should continue following them until they get to a human town or attack them now. But then he overhears the bandit talking about how his favorite race is elves, so Arthur realizes he can't risk leaving them alone with the girl any longer. However, he still needs to wait for it to get dark before he makes his move, so Arthur sits down and starts meditating to prepare himself for all the murder charges he's about to catch. Once it is sufficiently dark, Arthur opens his eyes and begins planning his attack. He notices that the bandits have a group of horned wolves on a leash, and he finds it odd that the wolves are obeying a group of humans with no resistance. He takes a closer look at them and realizes that they are wearing magic collars to force them to be obedient, and he can use this to his advantage, so he throws a couple of rocks at the wolves to rile them up. The bandits hear their wolves howling over there, and the leader orders one of his men to hurry up and go shut those damn wolves up. The bandit immediately gets up and kicks one of the wolves in the neck to get it to stop barking, and the second the bandit is distracted, Arthur seizes the opportunity. He summons a mana blade before jumping down behind the bandit, and within a few seconds, the bandit has been slashed to death. Arthur then takes the bandit's weapon, and as another one comes to check what all the commotion is, Arthur jumps on his back and slits his throat. That's 2 bandits down already, but Arthur's body is already getting exhausted, so he needs to end this quickly. Just then, another bandit comes to check why the other 2 are taking so long, so Arthur tries to insta-kill this one as well, but unfortunately, he missed the vital organs, so the guy screams and alerts the other bandits of Arthur's presence. The bandit leader realizes that Arthur is a mage, so he knows this isn't going to be an easy fight, but he also doesn't want to kill Arthur because selling a mage kit on the black market would earn him even more money than the elf girl. The bandit leader begins channeling magic into his arms and swings at Arthur. So Arthur jumps back and tries to counter with a kick, but the bandit leader managed to dodge. Arthur tries to catch him off guard by throwing his knife at him, but the bandit catches it and uses it against him. As a result, Arthur is knocked to the ground and the bandit lifts him up by the ankles to taunt him. He tells Arthur he is no match for an adult when it comes to strength, and Arthur realizes that the bandit is right, so he decides to attack with his magic instead. He casts a fireball right on top of the bandit's knee, and while he is screaming out in pain, Arthur stabs him in the head with his knife. Now, all that's left is to finish off the bandit that Arthur injured earlier, and once he is dead, Arthur goes to check on the girl in the carriage. The girl was blindfolded the entire time and she has no idea what's going on, so Arthur tells her he has taken care of all of the bandits, so she is safe now. Her name is Tessia, and as Arthur leads her out of the carriage, he tells her she can go home, but Tessia suddenly notices some blood on Arthur's hand and she gets really worried about him. Arthur realizes that it's normal for children to be horrified at the sight of blood, so it might not be a good idea to let her see all the dead bodies on the floor. He asks Tessia to wait over here for a minute and goes to cover up all the bandit bodies with a tarp. She asks Arthur what happened to the people that kidnapped her, and Arthur doesn't want to admit that he killed them, so he just says they got into a bit of an accident, so they won't be bothering her anymore. The girl doesn't seem to have any more questions, so Arthur gets her stuff out of the bandit carriage for her and says goodbye because he needs to continue heading home. However, Tessia grabs his arm and begs him to stay because she doesn't want to be left alone. If Arthur leaves her here by herself, she might get eaten by tree ghosts or something. He asks her if she knows how to get home, and she does know the directions, but she has no idea how long it will take to get to her village. Arthur doesn't like the idea of taking the detour, but he also knows there's no chance that Tessia will make it home alive if he doesn't help, so he ends up agreeing to escort her back home. Arthur looks over at the wolves that the bandits captured and he briefly considers using them for transportation, but he has no idea how to maintain control over a wolf, so he wants to just leave them behind. However, Tessia says they should at least remove the magic collars on the wolves so they can return to the forest. Arthur warns her that the wolves might attack once she removes the collars, but she thinks she'll be fine since she hasn't done anything to anger them. And as a resident of this forest, it is her job to take care of the creatures that live here. She eventually takes the collars off the wolves, and sure enough, the wolves peacefully walk back into the forest. The next morning, Arthur and Tessia begin walking in the direction of the elf village, and after a while, they take a break to eat. Arthur cooks up a little stew and tells her she has to eat it because she'll need the energy for the long journey ahead. Tessia thinks the stew smells weird, but Arthur isn't exactly a world-class chef. It's literally made out of nothing but dried meat and salt, so it doesn't taste good, but it's better than nothing. Tessia asks Arthur why he came to the Elshire forest in the first place, since it's rare for humans to come here, much less a lone child. So Arthur explains how he got separated from his family and ended up here. While they are on the topic, Arthur asks Tessia what it's like to live in the kingdom of Eleanor, and she absolutely loves it here. Although her parents are often busy with work, she spends most of her time with her servant and her grandfather. They continue their journey, but since Tessia doesn't know how far away her village is, it's hard to gauge how long this journey will take. And to make matters worse, those wolves that Tessia released have been following them for a while now, so Arthur is really wishing he had just killed them from the start. That night, Arthur decides to stand guard outside the tent to make sure the wolves don't attack him and Tessia while they are sleeping, but after a while, Tessia pokes her head out and asks Arthur to come to bed. Arthur tells her that he's not sleepy, so he's going to stand guard out here, but she's way too scared to be alone, so she pleads with him to come inside the tent with her. Arthur eventually gives in, so he decides to just keep watch from inside the tent for Tessia's sake. She's trying to pretend that she's not scared, but she also demands that Arthur stay by her side at all times. Before she goes to bed, she wants to learn a little about the human kingdom, so she asks Arthur if it's true that all humans are perverts who marry multiple wives. Arthur is surprised to hear Tessia say that and asks where she heard it from, so she explains that her grandfather told her. Arthur can't deny that people like that exist, especially in the Greer family, but for the most part, humans are modest people. Tessia believes Arthur, so she turns over and falls asleep immediately. The wolves didn't attack, so by morning, Arthur and Tessia got up and continued their journey. Tessia has really been warming up to Arthur over the past few days, and now that she has had a chance to forget about the slave traders, she seems a lot happier. Although she is still pretty hopeless when it comes to survival skills because she can't even cross a creek on her own, so Arthur has to carry her across. All of a sudden, Arthur is hit with a strange throbbing pain in his chest and he has no idea what's wrong with him. Tessia worriedly runs off to go find some medicinal herbs that might help, but Arthur doesn't think this is a regular illness. While he's propped up against a tree, the wolf from before shows up, and Arthur is starting to panic because he is in no condition to fight it off if it decides to attack right now. Tessia soon returns with the herbs, so Arthur warns her to stay away because the wolf might be dangerous. But to his surprise, the wolf just drops a dead pig in front of Arthur and walks away. Arthur is confused by what just happened, but Tessia assumes the wolf was trying to thank him for his help earlier. That night, Arthur and Tessia set up camp and enjoy some roasted meat by the fireside. This tastes a lot better than the stew, so Tessia really enjoys it. And while she was searching for medicinal herbs earlier, she happened to find some mushrooms, so she offers some to Arthur. But he probably shouldn't have accepted the strange mushrooms because it gave him a bad case of diarrhea. After Arthur is done emptying his guts, he is really tired, so he is seconds away from passing out, but Tessia keeps talking to him. She is telling Arthur about how her grandpa used to read her storybooks about the human and dwarven kingdoms, so she always wanted to visit those places, but she was never allowed to since elves don't trust people from the other races. Just then, Tessia realizes that Arthur hasn't been listening to a single word she said, but she knows he's just sleepy, so she covers him with a blanket and wishes him a good night. The next morning, the two continue their journey, but the pain in Arthur's chest is getting worse. Tessia apologizes for not being able to help, but Arthur tells her it's not a big deal. Changing topics, Tessia asks Arthur if it's alright for her to call him Artie since she thinks of him as a friend. After all, they spent so much time together, and the two of them have gotten really close. Arthur says he doesn't mind being friends with her, and Tessia is surprised that he didn't react much. Arthur then jokingly swears to cherish every moment that the great Lady Tessia thinks of him as a friend, but that makes her upset, so she tells Arthur to stop acting so childish. Arthur thinks it's funny that she would say that when she was the one begging him to stay by her side at all times because she was scared, but Tessia says that's an entirely different thing. Jokes aside, now that Arthur thinks about it, Tessia is the first friend he has ever made. Even in his old world, people were so scared of him that he never truly had anyone whom he could call a friend till now. Just then, Tessia spots something that looks familiar, so she tells Arthur to come take a look. Arthur comes over expecting to see a cool-looking stick or something, but to his surprise, he is standing in front of a huge tree with a portal in the middle of it. Tessia tells Arthur that this is the entrance to Elf Village, so she extends her hand and tells him to come with her. Unfortunately, the elves still really hate humans, so the second Arthur sets foot in the Elf Village, he is apprehended and held at blade point. He looks to Tessia for help since she could vouch for him, but to his shock, Tessia just coldly stares at him and doesn't say a word. Upon seeing this, Arthur thinks Tessia must have set him up to be killed, and he can't believe he was foolish enough to believe anyone would actually want to be friends with him. After all, he has already suffered countless betrayals in his past life before. The elves are about to cut off his head while Tessia watches, but it turns out she had nothing to do with it. No idea why she didn't say anything until now, but once she hears the guards say they are going to kill Arthur, she tells them to stop. One of the guards warns her that this boy is a dangerous human, but Tessia asserts that Arthur isn't dangerous at all. In fact, he's the only reason she was able to make it back home. Tessia's testimony should have at least made the guard reconsider executing Arthur, but no, he just assumes Arthur must have brainwashed her into thinking he's a good person, so the guard still plans to kill him anyway. However, before he could do that, a man appears before them and demands that they let the boy go. His name is Virion, and he is Tessia's grandfather, as well as the former king of the elf tribe, but he is much more reasonable, so he believes Tessia when she says Arthur saved her. He also apologizes to Arthur for treating him this way when he went through all this trouble to save Tessia, but it was pretty suspicious that the missing princess happened to show up with a random human boy. Arthur is relieved that he isn't going to be killed anymore, but he's also shocked to hear that Tessia is a princess since she never told him. They literally traveled together for days, but Tessia just didn't think it was important enough to mention apparently. Just then, Tessia's mother and father show up since they were informed that their daughter had been returned, and Tessia runs into their arms because she's missed them a lot. If Tessia is a princess, then that must mean her parents are the king and queen of Eleanor, but they aren't as understanding as Virion was. As soon as Tessia's father spots Arthur, he demands to know what a filthy human is doing in his kingdom. He orders his soldiers to apprehend the human and execute him immediately, but none of them move. Tessia's father may be the current king, but Virion told them to leave Arthur alone, and they are all terrified of Virion. Virion tells the king that Arthur is the one who saved Tessia and helped her get back here, so they can't treat him like a criminal. Tessia also demands that Arthur be welcomed into their castle as a guest, but her father is hesitant to agree since it is usually forbidden for humans to set foot in the elf kingdom, let alone enter the castle, but he doesn't want to deal with a tantrum from Tessia, so he reluctantly agrees to welcome Arthur properly. Since the misunderstanding has been cleared up, everyone gets ready to head for the castle, but before they leave, Virion tells Arthur that he would like to have a word with him later. Arthur is a little wary of Virion since he can tell that the man is extremely powerful, but he doesn't have much time to think about it because Tessia drags him off so she can show him around. This is the first time Arthur has ever seen the elf kingdom, so he is amazed by how different it is from the human kingdom. But the prejudice against humans is still strong since all the elves apparently stopped what they were doing just to stare at Arthur while he walks to the castle with Tessia. However, no one says anything to offend him since he is officially a royal guest now. The only one who treats him kindly is Tessia, but Arthur is still trying to figure out why Tessia took so long to intervene when the guards were about to kill him. Just then, the pain in Arthur's chest comes back, and it's still getting worse by the day, but he still doesn't know what's causing it. After they arrive at the castle, Tessia is greeted by all her servants, and she instructs them to treat Arthur with care and respect regardless of the fact that he's a human. And now that that's done, she asks Arthur if he wants to go play with her, but before that, Arthur says he needs to go talk to her parents because they probably want to hear the details of what happened to Tessia and how they got back. They all head into the meeting room, including Tessia, because she doesn't want to be left out, and since they are going to be having a chat, Tessia suggests they should get some snacks. This has practically turned into a tea party, but they still have things to discuss, so Tessia's father decides to formally introduce himself. His name is Alduin, and as Arthur knows, he is the king of Eleanor. His wife's name is Muriel, and his father is Virion. Arthur introduces himself as a humble commoner from the kingdom hat of Sepin. and he is well aware that a human like him would normally never be allowed to set foot in Eleanor, let alone meet with the royal family, so he appreciates their accommodation. Alduin is surprised that Arthur behaves so maturely despite being a child, but more importantly, he wants to know exactly what happened with Tessia and how she went missing. Arthur explains everything that happened with him getting separated from his family during a bandit attack and ending up in the Elven Forest, although he left out the part about meeting Sylvia in the cave. Then he gets to the part where he meets Tessia and explains that he found her while she was being kidnapped by slave traders. Alduin is enraged that humans dared to try selling Tessia into slavery, but Arthur reminds him that elves have also committed the crime of slave trading, so it isn't exclusive to humans. That aside, Virion asks Arthur how he managed to rescue Tessia from the slave traders, so he explains that he killed them all. Upon hearing this, one of the guards starts yelling that there's no way a mere child could have killed slave traders on his own, but Virion tells him to shut his mouth unless he wants to lose his job. Arthur doesn't look like he's lying, so Alduin says he believes him. And now that everyone understands what happened, Arthur has a request he would like to make. As he already told them, he got stranded in this first after being attacked by bandits, so he would like them to help him get back home. Alduin is infuriated that a human would dare ask the elven royal family for a favor, but Arthur did go out of his way to escort Tessia home, so it's only fair that they return the favor. Plus, if Alduin doesn't agree to help Arthur, he will have to deal with Tessia's tantrums, and he doesn't want that. He relents and agrees to help Arthur, but the teleportation gate that leads back to Sapin is sealed and can only be used once every 7 years during the meeting between the heads of the 3 tribes. And the last meeting was 2 years ago, so Arthur would have to wait another 5 years before the portal would open again. Arthur doesn't want to wait that long, and Alduin also doesn't like the idea of letting a human stay in Eleanor for 5 years, so he says he will arrange for a group of soldiers to escort Arthur back to Sapin. He wants Arthur to leave as soon as possible, but it's already very late, so he says Arthur can rest here for today, and tomorrow morning he will leave. Arthur thanks Alduin for agreeing to send him home, but the pain in his chest is getting much worse, and Virion seems to notice that something is wrong with him. A little while later, a room has been prepared for Arthur in the castle, and he is currently taking a bath, but the pain just keeps getting worse and worse, so Arthur is getting worried that he might die. After his bath, he walks out onto the balcony to get some fresh air in hopes that it will help with the pain. He feels a little better now, but he needs to figure out the cause of his constant pain before something bad happens. Just then, Arthur looks up and notices Tessia and her parents on the balcony above him, and seeing them like that reminds him of his own parents. He still has no idea whether Ranald and Alice managed to survive the bandit attack, but he knows they are tough, so they must have made it out alive somehow. With that said, he still really wishes he could talk to them right now. Just then, Tessia notices Arthur and she can tell that he looks sad, so after she's done catching up with her parents, she goes to talk to him. Once she finally catches up to Arthur, she apologizes for how rudely her father treated him, but Arthur says he doesn't mind. He understands why Alduin would behave like that since there have been decades of wars between the elves and the humans, so of course it would be hard for him to trust a human, especially when his daughter is involved. Bringing up the topic of parents reminds Arthur of the fact that he is far away from his parents and he is worried they might not be happy to see him. After all, the whole reason they went on a trip was for Arthur's sake, so they might blame him for the whole thing. He also blames himself for not being able to protect his family from the bandits and getting separated from them. But then Tessia grabs his face and starts shaking his head. She doesn't know much about Arthur's parents, but if they are anything like hers, then she is sure they will be happy to see Arthur once he finally returns. Just then, the corridor is filled with dozens of dazzling fireflies, and amidst the bright light, Arthur starts trying to recall his parents' smiling faces. He has been with them ever since he was reborn into this world, and not once have they ever given him the impression that they didn't love him. So why was he so worried that they might start hating him after what happened? He has been letting his trauma from his past life cloud his judgment with suspicion for a while now. He even suspected Tessia of backstabbing him earlier, but when he looks at her now, all he sees is an innocent girl who would never want her to friend. All of a sudden, Arthur senses a projectile flying straight at Tessia, so he catches it and immediately charges up his mana to attack the assailant. However, to his surprise, the one who attacked Tessia was Virion. Arthur can't believe Virion would attempt to do something as evil as kill his own granddaughter, but Virion tells him he never intended to hurt Tessia. And the projectiles he threw were just a couple of fireflies, so she wouldn't have felt a thing. However, he still finds it impressive that Arthur was able to react and counterattack so quickly. The reason Virion pulled this stunt was to verify whether Arthur was telling the truth about possessing the strength to kill those slave traders, and he was clearly telling the truth. Tessia runs over and tells Virion to stop messing with Arthur, but that's not why he came here. He noticed something interesting about Arthur earlier, so he wants to have a little sparring match with him to see how strong he really is. Varian uses his magic to create a sword for Arthur to fight with and lifts Tessia out of the way so she doesn't get hurt. Arthur agrees to the duel, so he charges forward and swings at Varian, but he is too fast. Even when Arthur uses mana to boost his movement speed, he still can't keep up with Varian, and just when he thinks he finally has an opening to attack, Varian smashes Arthur's sword with his palm. A piece of the shattered wood goes flying towards Tessia, so Arthur throws what's left of his sword at it to protect her. Arthur then attacks Varian with nothing but his mana, but Varian counters with his own mana. Varian's strength is completely overwhelming, so Arthur doesn't stand much of a chance at beating him, but he isn't one to give up, so after Varian blows him back, Arthur immediately charges back in and lands one clean hit on Varian's forehead. It didn't do much damage, but Varian is amazed that Arthur was able to slip past his defenses and actually land a hit. He wants to go for another round, but all of a sudden, Tessia pinches his butt and tells him to stop causing trouble for Arthur. Arthur says it's fine, and he kind of feels honored that a man as powerful as Varian thinks he is worth dueling. While they're on the topic, Varian tells Arthur he wants to take him on as a disciple. Arthur is surprised and asks Varian if he's joking. But this isn't something Varian would joke about, so he asks Arthur if he will accept the offer. Arthur doesn't know what to say, especially since he still hasn't had a chance to inform his parents that he is still alive. If that's the only problem, Varian tells Arthur he knows of a way Arthur can talk to his parents right now. Arthur is intrigued, but before he can say anything, he is hit with yet another sharp chest pain, and Varian seems to know what's causing it. He tells Arthur that he has inherited a beast will, and unless Arthur agrees to become his disciple, the beast will is going to kill him. After hearing such horrible news, Arthur goes to bed, but he's finding it hard to go to sleep. The anxiety of being away from his family, combined with the fact that he may die soon, gives him a terrible nightmare where he is haunted by a sleep paralysis demon. He suddenly hears someone calling out his name, so he opens his eyes and finds Tessia sitting on top of him. She has been trying to wake Arthur up for a while now, but he just keeps talking about some sort of monster, so she's starting to get upset. She tells him he needs to hurry up and get ready because Varian is already waiting for him outside, so Arthur gets out of bed and starts changing his clothes. While he is changing, Tessia asks him if he is really going to stay here and become her grandpa's disciple, but Arthur hasn't decided yet. It depends on whether or not Varian really get him in contact with his family, because as long as Arthur gets the chance to talk to his parents and let them know that he is alright, he will be satisfied. Once Arthur has gotten dressed, he and Tessia head downstairs together. But as soon as they open the doors, they hear Alduin arguing with Varian because he can't stand the thought of letting Arthur live in the Elf Kingdom. It would go against centuries of elf traditions if Varian were to take Arthur in as a disciple, but Varian doesn't care. He's fond of Arthur, so he's going to make him a disciple, and no one can stop him. Tessia tries to stand up for Arthur, but Alduin doesn't want to hear her opinion because she is clearly in favor of Arthur staying here. Coincidentally, Varian doesn't want to hear Alduin's opinion either, so he tells Arthur and Tessia to get in the carriage because they have places to be. As they are riding to go see Varian's mysterious friend, it takes so long that Tessia ends up falling asleep. Arthur asks Varian if it will take much longer for them to arrive, but he addresses Varian as grandpa this time. Varian is amused by how quickly Arthur dropped the formalities, but if things work out and Arthur ends up living here under Varian's tutelage, then he would practically be a part of the family. Varian doesn't mind Arthur's casual tone, and if anything, he's glad that Tessia finally has a friend to play with. As an only child, she is the sole successor to the throne, and as such, most of the other kids avoid her. And the few who did approach her all ended up betraying her trust one way or another, so Tessia has a hard time opening up to new people now. However, when she's with Arthur, she always looks like she's having so much fun, so Varian is very thankful. Arthur also has severe trust issues, but when he looks at Varian, all he sees is a sincere, loving grandpa, so he feels like he can trust him. The carriage eventually arrives at their destination. Arthur wakes Tessia up and they all step out. Arthur is really curious to see who this mysterious person is because they must be really important if a man as powerful as Varian is willing to come all the way out here to see them. Varian then angrily stomps on the door and yells for Rinia to come out already. And when he puts his ear next to the door to hear if anyone is coming, he gets smacked in the face by the door. After regaining his composure, Varian introduces Rinia as a special mage, and with her skill set, he is sure she can help Arthur get in contact with his family. She invites everyone in so they can get started, but once they are inside, all Arthur sees is a regular house with a bucket of water on the table, so he is starting to wonder how she's going to help him. Rinia explains that she is a special type of mage called a seer, and as a seer, she is able to look into the past and future of people. She momentarily uses her powers on Arthur, and she can immediately tell that he is an interesting person because there are some parts of his past that she couldn't see. Although it's not like she would understand much anyway, since she only sees fragments of the past when she uses her power. With that said, Arthur didn't come here for her to look into his past or future. He came here because he wants to let his family know that he is alright. Rhaenyra pushes the bucket of water in front of Arthur and tells him to think of his parents in great detail to achieve the best result. She then begins using her powers, and in a matter of seconds, Arthur begins having visions of his parents. Alice has just finished preparing a pot of stew for dinner, which the two of them definitely can't finish, and Reno loves this stew, but neither of them can really enjoy it without Arthur with them. For all they know, he could have died after falling off that cliff, and Reynold blamed himself so much that he nearly became an alcoholic, but he still needed to take care of his pregnant wife, so they were forced to head to the city instead of searching for Arthur. There, Reynold got a job, and in a matter of weeks, he somehow earned enough money to afford a house in the city, but no amount of success could ever make them feel better now that Arthur is gone. Just then, the two of them hear Arthur's voice, but they can't see him, so they are worried it's his ghost. Arthur explains that he is still alive, and he is currently living in the elf kingdom of Eleanor. He isn't exactly sure of how it works, but thanks to a friend, he is using a special kind of magic to talk to them. He wants to come home, but he can't do that right now because there's something wrong with his body, and he won't be able to survive unless he fixes it. But he swears that he will return to them as soon as he has recovered, although he isn't sure how long that will take. He also doesn't want them to blame themselves for what happened because it was his choice to make, and if he had to do it again to ensure his family's safety, he wouldn't hesitate. Reynold and Alice are unbelievably happy to hear that Arthur is still alive, but having to say goodbye to them again brings tears to Arthur's eyes. Still, he is glad that he got to talk to them again, and he has decided that he will never make them worry like that ever again. But to do that, he will need to become stronger, so he asks Virion to make him his disciple. Now, they just need to convince Alduin to agree to let Arthur live in the castle. Alduin is still against the idea because of his deep hatred for the humans, but Tessia reminds him that Arthur saved her, so if he kicks him out, then he'd be seen as an ungrateful savage. Alduin still tries to argue that it would cause a huge incident if Arthur's presence were to cause any problems within the Elf Kingdom, but Virion already thought of that. He tells Alduin to announce that Arthur is his new disciple, and with Virion's power, no one would dare to complain or protest against Arthur being here. With that, Arthur has officially been given permission to live in the royal palace, and after the meeting is over, Alduin walks up to him to apologize for his rude behavior earlier. He may not like humans in general, but Arthur seems like a good kid. Plus, since Arthur saved Tessia, as a father, it is his duty to repay him, so he tells Arthur he can think of himself as part of the family now. Arthur is surprised that Alduin and Mariel changed their stance so suddenly, but then again, Virion and Tessia were advocating on his behalf a lot, so it makes sense that Alduin changed his mind. Arthur thanks Alduin and says it's an honor to be welcomed into the royal castle, but Tessia interrupts and says this isn't good enough. If they are really going to welcome Arthur, then she wants Arthur to be allowed to play outside with her, and considering the fact that Alduin has already accepted Arthur, he has no objections to him and Tessia playing together. Now that they have permission, Tessia excitedly drags Arthur out into town to show him around, and he is once again amazed by the elven culture. Tessia knows this part of town well, so she tells Arthur that there's a shop that sells a lot of snacks down the road, but it's really popular, so if they don't hurry, then all the snacks will sell out. She pulls his arm to get him to go faster, and Arthur is happily following her, but then he accidentally bumps into a kid along the way. It was an honest mistake, but the kid starts insulting Arthur and yelling at him for getting his filthy human germs all over him. At this point, Arthur is wondering how this kid has the balls to be so rude when he is within punch range, but Tessia tells him to just ignore him because it's not worth causing trouble over something as minor as this. Normally, Arthur would have taken the high road and walked away from Ferrith, but then Ferrith starts telling Tessia that she shouldn't hang out with trash like Arthur, and that she should be spending time with him instead. Ferrith is a member of the elf nobility, and he seems to think highly of himself, so Arthur decides to mess with him a little. He pretends that he's excited to meet Ferrith, but he intentionally mispronounces his name as Phoebich. Ferrith gets mad that Arthur mispronounced his name, so Arthur apologizes and acts like it was a mistake. He says he will be sure to pay proper respect to Ferrith the next time they meet and turns around so he can leave with Tessia, but Ferrith stops him. He may be insufferable, but he's not stupid, so he figured out that Arthur was intentionally mocking him and he refuses to let such disrespect go unpunished. He challenges Arthur to a duel with the honor of his family name on the line, and Arthur can't believe he was really dumb enough to request a duel. Tessia steps in and tells Ferrith that even if he is a noble, this is going too far. Ferrith says it is perfectly natural to challenge someone to a duel if they dishonor your name, but Tessia reminds Ferrith that Arthur is the disciple of Virion, and it would be incredibly stupid to challenge the disciple of the strongest man in the kingdom to a fight, but Ferrith is confident that he couldn't possibly lose to a human. He tells Arthur that if he doesn't accept this duel, then he would be bringing dishonor to Virion's name, but Arthur is still trying to wrap his head around this whole thing. In his old world, a duel was always a battle to the death, so it makes no sense for a kid to carelessly challenge him to a duel here. But judging by the mildly entertained looks on the adults nearby, it seems that duels aren't death battles here, so Arthur has no reason to refuse. Tessia asks Arthur if he's sure he wants to do this, and he says he is fine with it. So the duel becomes official, and the two get ready to fight. As the duel begins, Ferrith confidently rushes towards Arthur with a stick in hand, but everyone thinks they have a plan until they get punched in the face, and Ferrith clearly wasn't ready for that. Ferrith is out cold, so his friends rush over to check on him, but Tessia already knew things would end up like this. Anyway, since the duel is over, she grabs Arthur's hand and starts leading him away because she still has a lot of things she wants to do with him. The two spend the entire day together and visit all kinds of shops and stores, and after they've had their fun, they take a break on a balcony to talk. Tessia asks Arthur when his training with Virion is supposed to begin, and Arthur says he's going to start training first thing in the morning, but he clearly has something on his mind. Arthur thinks back to a conversation he had with Virion, and Virion clearly told him that his training is going to feel like hell. If you gotta describe it, it's going to feel like being submerged in boiling tar, and Arthur is going to have to go through that every day for several years without the support of his family. So Virion wanted to know if Arthur is truly ready for this, and Arthur responded yes. Even now, he is excited to begin training tomorrow, even though he knows it will be tough because he wants to gain enough strength to build his desired future. Tessia tells Arthur she will work hard too so she doesn't fall behind, but right now, she still wants to enjoy their playdate, so she suggests that they should go get some more food. A few years have passed and both Arthur and Tessia have been training under Virion's instruction. They bonded a lot in this time, but Tessia is also very competitive, so they've both been going at it really hard today. After training for a while, Tessia has completely tired herself out, so while she's resting, Virion decides to give Liam a lesson on magic. Once a person has stabilized their mana, they can become able to use elemental magic in the form of water, fire, wind, or earth. However, the elements that can be learnt are heavily dependent on race in this world. For example, elves are naturally gifted at wielding wind magic and have high aptitudes for water and earth elements. Fire is generally incompatible with them. In contrast, dwarves are extremely talented when it comes to fire and earth elemental magic, while lacking skills in wind and water magic. However, humans have the ability to use all four elements, although the affinity a person may have with an individual element varies wildly depending on one's training. Tessia raises her hand and asks Virion why he hasn't told Arthur to do any training with his mana core if it's so important, and Virion answers that Arthur is simply too weak to handle it right now. His body contains a beast will, and while it can grant great power, it also destabilizes the connection between Arthur's flesh and his mana core. That is what's causing the pain in his chest, so he needs to reassimilate his mana core before he can train with mana again. Tessia jokes that this means she is stronger than Arthur right now, but he yells that of course she would be stronger when all her attacks are infused with mana. Among the elves, a person is said to be talented if they awaken their mana by the age of 10, but Tessia was able to use magic by the time she was 9, so she's been training alongside Arthur ever since. Anyway, since Arthur's training has been progressing well, Virion tells him it's time to awaken his beast will, and if the procedure succeeds, then the pain in Arthur's chest should stop altogether. Doing this will make Arthur an official beast tamer, so he tells Virion he is grateful for the help and asks him to start right away. Arthur sits down and Virion begins awakening his beast will, but Tessia is worried because she doesn't know if Arthur is going to be okay or not. Virion admits that Arthur will feel a bit of discomfort, but it shouldn't be that bad. However, once Virion begins awakening the beast will, Arthur screams out in pain, and so much energy erupts from his body that he blasts Virion and Tessia away. The awakening was technically successful, but all the strain it put on Arthur's body made him pass out immediately, leaving Virion and Tessia worried. They take Arthur back to the castle and put him in bed so he can recover a little. And once Arthur finally regains consciousness, he finds Virion waiting by the side of the bed. Virion asks him if he's alright, and Arthur says he feels okay. So Virion asks him if there's anything special about the beast will he received, because a reaction like the one Arthur had rarely ever happens. Arthur had intended to keep his encounter with Sylvia a secret, but there's no point in hiding it now, so he tells Virion that the beast will was given to him by a dragon. Virion is shocked to hear this, and honestly, he finds it hard to believe, but he can't deny that the power of Arthur's beast will is similar to that of a dragon. He turns to Arthur and tells him that he can't tell anyone about his dragon will because if word got out about this, he would attract a lot of unwanted attention. With that said, he tells Arthur that he is scheduled to return home in the next 4 months, so he is going to have to be careful once he leaves. Arthur is shocked because he thought he had 2 more years until the next inter-race meeting, but apparently, a cultural exchange event was organized recently, so in 4 months, the portals to Exara's city will be opened. Arthur asks Virion if Tessia knows about this because she'd be devastated to find out that he's leaving so soon, but Virion tells him that the king and queen are talking to her about it right now. Later that night, Arthur is lying in bed with the egg Sylvia gave him and trying to come to terms with the fact that he will have to leave Tessia in 4 months. Just then, he notices that the egg is starting to crack, and a few moments later, a little baby dragon pops out. Arthur was worried at first, but the baby dragon is cute and it seems harmless, so he picks it up, but then the dragon bites into his arm. Arthur reels back in pain and drops the dragon, but when he looks at the spot where he got bitten, instead of regular bite marks, he sees a crest form. This crest acts as a link between Arthur and the baby dragon, so he can now sense what the dragon is thinking, even if he doesn't really understand it. Since he is going to be taking care of the dragon, he decides to name it Sylvie, after its mother Sylvia. He then goes back to sleep, but a few hours later, Tessia walks into Arthur's room because she wants to talk about him leaving in 4 months. But when she lifts the covers to wake Arthur up, spots Sylvie in the bed with him, and she immediately forgets all about why she came here. Arthur is startled awake, and at first he thought something bad had happened. But then he realizes that Tessia is just fawning over Sylvie, so he was back to bed. Later that day, Arthur and Tessia walk over to the training grounds for their lesson with Virion, and Tessia is trying her hardest to get Sylvie to like her. But after nearly hugging her to death earlier today, Sylvie is staying away from Tessia. They soon find Virion, and as soon as he sees Sylvie on Arthur's head, he freaks out because he never imagined he would get to see a dragon in real life. While Tessia continues messing with Sylvie, Arthur explains that Sylvie hatched in response to the beastful awakening that Arthur went through yesterday. He wonders if keeping Sylvie with him might cause problems because it would be bad if people realize she is a dragon, but Virion tells Arthur he doesn't have to worry about that. Dragons are practically a myth now, so no one would ever suspect that Arthur's pet is actually a dragon. All he needs to do is claim that Sylvie is some sort of exotic beast that just happens to look like a dragon. That aside, it's time for them to begin today's training. So Virion tells Arthur that now that he has awakened his beast will, he will have to train both his beast core and monocore simultaneously. And the best way to do that is with real-life experience, so Virion begins transforming. Once the transformation is complete, Virion tells Arthur that his training starts now, so Arthur tries to brace for an attack. But Virion simply takes 1 step forward and vanishes. Arthur tries defending himself, but he has no idea how to track Virion's movements, so he doesn't know where he will be attacked. He knows Virion is still here, but no matter how hard he tries, he can't find any traces of him. It is truly an amazing ability, but Arthur doesn't want to get his ass beaten as part of a demonstration, so he immediately raises his hands and gives up. As soon as he does this, Virion appears behind him and Arthur complains because fighting him is way too difficult. Virion could have landed a 30-move combo on Arthur at any point there, and Arthur still wouldn't have known where he was because Virion's beast will is that of a shadow panther. It allows him to manipulate the wind with such great control that he can control and cancel out the sound that he makes. His transformation is pretty impressive, but it's not a perfect ability because it drains a ton of Virion's mana. Anyway, Virion never really intended to fight Arthur in that form to begin with, he just wanted to show off a little, and now that he has demonstrated how powerful a beast will can be, he summons a sword so Arthur can begin his real training. A few days go by and Arthur has been making great progress with his beast will mastery. The pain in his chest has stopped bothering him, and his body has been trained so much that he can now keep up with Virion's shadow form. But beyond that, Arthur got to spend the rest of his time playing with Tessia like a regular child. Later on, while Arthur and Tessia are on another date, Arthur bumps into Firith in the street. However, he doesn't recognize him at all, and Firith feels insulted, so he demands another duel with Arthur. Of course, that goes about as well as you would expect, so Firith ends up on the floor and his friends stand over him wondering how he managed to lose in half a second. Arthur still has no idea who Firith is, so Tessia reminds him that he's the kid who challenged Arthur to a duel a few years ago, and Arthur remembers having a lot of fun that day, so he extends his hand to help Firith up as a friend, and Firith accepts because he doesn't want to fight Arthur anymore. Arthur asks Firith if he and his friends are going to be joining the cultural exchange event in a few months, and Firith proudly confirms it, claiming that he was chosen because of his exceptional abilities. However, in reality, all the children from noble families were asked to go. If that's the case, Arthur asks if that means Tessia will be going as well, but apparently not. Ferret says the reason is because the royal family can't risk their helpless princess getting kidnapped again, which is a fair point, but Tessia really didn't appreciate being called helpless, so she punches Ferret in the face and sends him flying unintentionally. Ferret is knocked out cold from that punch, and this isn't a good look for Tessia, so Arthur grabs her and runs off before a large crowd forms. Once they are a safe distance away, Arthur yells at Tessia because a princess can't go around punching her subjects for no reason. Although it's not like Arthur has much of a right to complain about violence with how he lived his past life. Tessia doesn't understand what the big deal is because she's fairly certain that Ferret is still alive, but Arthur is yelling at her just like her father, so she calls him an old man and runs off crying. Later that night, Tessia is still crying in her room, so to cheer her up, Arthur sneaks up to her window and invites her to come with him to look at the forest. Tessia agrees to go with him, but as they are walking through the forest, she asks him if this is really alright. Arthur tells her there's nothing to worry about because if they somehow run into kidnappers out here, they are strong enough to escape without much trouble. Besides, it's worth the risk for the view of the night sky. Arthur asks Tessia if she's starting to get sleepy, and she's clearly on the verge of going to dreamland, but she insists that she is fine. Arthur tells her she can sleep if she wants to, but this might be the last time Tessia gets to spend quality time like this with Arthur, so she says she's going to stay awake. However, she's so sleepy that she's starting to hallucinate monsters in the trees, and Arthur finds it funny that she's still scared of ghosts at her age. Tessia tells him she's not scared of ghosts, and she insists that her body is only shaking because she's cold, so she dumps more wood into the fire. She then asks Arthur to tell her a bit about the human kingdom to help her stay awake, but Arthur doesn't know much about it because he has never actually been there. Tessia tells him she wants Arthur to stay here forever, and he would like to stay with her too, but that would mean he would never get to see his family again. He wants to keep talking, but Tessia has already fallen asleep, so he decides to call it a night. The day for Arthur's departure finally comes, but before he leaves, Virion has a gift to give him. This is a special compass that will help Arthur find his way back to the Elf Kingdom if he ever wants to return. Arthur thanks him for the gift, but then he notices that Tessia isn't here, so he asks if anyone has seen her, but she apparently couldn't bring herself to watch Arthur leave. The portal is eventually open, and Arthur is about to step through, but then he hears Tessia call his name. She is running down the street to get to him, but she falls down halfway, so Arthur runs to check on her. He extends a hand to help her up, and Tessia begins rambling, telling Arthur that he had better take care of himself when he's gone or she'll never forgive him. Arthur knows she is really worried about him, so he pulls her up and gives her one final hug, telling Tessia that he's going to miss her a lot. After arriving in the city of Cyrus, Arthur reunites with his parents, and he finds out he has a little sister now. Her name is Eleanor, and Alice and Reynold have been telling her stories about Arthur for years now, so she's excited to meet him. They all head inside, and Alice immediately begins asking Arthur if he is alright. The last time he spoke to them, Arthur mentioned something about being sick, so she wants to know if Arthur managed to get better. Arthur tells her he is fine and she doesn't need to worry about him, but he still has a lot he wants to talk about, so Arthur explains everything that he experienced after getting separated from his family. However, he leaves out the part about meeting Sylvia and her beast will. He tells them about how he met Tessia and the time he spent in the Elf Kingdom to cure his ailment. Alice asks him if he's sure he's fine because if he were to relapse, that they'd have no way of curing him here, but Arthur assures her that that won't happen. He can't tell them about his beast will, so he makes up a cause and tells them his sickness was caused because he awakened too early, making his monocore unstable. Arthur doesn't like the fact that he just lied to his parents, but it would be too dangerous for him to tell them everything until he becomes strong enough to face any threats that may arise. Just then, Reynold notices Sylvie, so he asks Arthur where she came from. So Arthur makes something up and tells Reynold he found Sylvie in a mana beast's cave. From there, he decides to take her in and made her his pet, and Eleanor seems to get along well with her. That aside, Reynold still has more questions, so he gets up and asks Arthur what stage his mana core is at right now. Alice scolds Reynold for trying to pick a fight with Arthur when he just got back from a long journey, but Reynold sees nothing wrong with wanting to measure how strong his son has gotten. Arthur doesn't mind, but before he answers any more questions, he wants to know what job Reynold has that he can afford to live in such a nice house. Reynold explains that he works as a security instructor at the Helsty auction house, and his mana core is currently dark orange. Arthur is really impressed to hear that since it's rather difficult to achieve an orange mana core. Mana cores range from black all the way to white, and the lighter the color of the core, the stronger the core becomes. Reynold is an augmenter, so he obviously spends a lot of time training his body, but who would have thought he was also training his mana core at the same time? Reynold is really proud of himself, so he asks Arthur what stage his mana core is at, and Arthur tells him he's at the light red stage. Reynold curses at the realization that Arthur has nearly caught up to him, but he forgot Eleanor was in the room, so now she's dropping F-bombs constantly. Reynold still can't believe that Arthur is one breakthrough away from surpassing him in strength, and he refuses to take this lying down, so he asks Arthur to have a sparring match with him in the garden right now. Arthur agrees to the match, but before they could head out, the living room doors swing open as Vincent walks in to ask if Reynold's son is back yet. Reynold introduces the man to Arthur as Vincent Halsey, and he is the owner of the auction house that Reynold works at, so he is pretty much Reynold's boss. Vincent and his wife Tabitha are both happy to finally meet Arthur since she has heard so much about him, and Arthur says he is honored to meet them as well. Vincent is surprised by how polite Arthur is because he knows Arthur couldn't have learned any manners from Reynold. Moving on, Vincent and Tabitha introduce Arthur to their daughter Lilia, and at first she acts pretty reserved around Arthur. But as soon as she spots Sylvie on Arthur's shoulder, she falls in love. She asks Arthur if it's alright for her to touch Sylvie, and once Arthur gives her permission, she immediately starts cuddling. While Lilia is doing that, Reynold informs Arthur that Vincent technically owns this house, so they should probably get his permission before they destroy anything. Vincent gets worried as soon as he hears Reynold mention destruction, and his fears are confirmed when he finds out that Reynold and Arthur are planning on sparring in the garden. Everyone heads outside to watch the match, but Vincent asks if it's really okay for Arthur and Reynold to fight. He honestly has a hard time believing that someone as young as Arthur could have reached the light red core stage, but Alice knows Arthur has always been quick to learn new things. Plus, it's not like he has a reason to lie about it, so Tabitha tells Vincent to just sit down and enjoy the show. In reality, Arthur could have broken through to the orange stage years ago, but while he was training with his beast will, he wasn't allowed to train his mana core. But he still has some other tricks he is dying to show off. As the match begins, Arthur and Reynold begin trading blows, and Reynold is impressed by how strong Arthur has gotten, but he is still able to overpower him in terms of strength. Eventually, distance is created between the two of them, and Reynold says he wants to kick things up a notch, so he engulfs his hand in flames and tells Arthur he can back out now if he wants. All mages in this world have a type of elemental mana which they are most compatible with, and while conjurers are able to easily manipulate these elements, the same can't be said for augmenters. However, there is one exception to this rule because when augmenters reach a certain level, they are able to identify their compatible element and use it to strengthen their attacks. Imbuing his body with fire magic has made Reynold a lot tougher to deal with, so Arthur decides to go all out as well and begins channeling mana into his arms. The two clash again, and this time they are a lot more evenly matched, but Arthur still gets blown back by Reynold's force. All of Arthur's knowledge from his past life made his training with Varian very effective. So much so that he was able to fully master fire magic early on in his training, so Varian told him he might want to begin training to go beyond regular fire. And this is the result of that training. Arthur once again gathers mana in his hands, but this time electricity begins to crackle around Arthur as he starts generating lightning. Reynold can't believe Arthur is really capable of using a higher form of fire magic, but Arthur isn't done yet, so while using the lightning, he simultaneously begins controlling the water from the fountain and uses it to attack Reynold from behind. Reynold is able to block the attack. He is utterly shocked that Arthur is able to use both fire and water elements. He couldn't be prouder of his boy, so he hugs Arthur and asks him where he learned to do that and if he has any more interesting tricks to share. Arthur explains that he only recently learned how to use lightning magic and he still can't control it well, but he is making good progress. Eleanor runs out onto the field to check on Arthur and Reynold. Meanwhile, Vincent and Tabitha just stand there in awe because no normal kid should be capable of what Arthur just did. Later that evening, they all sit down to eat dinner, and Vincent won't stop talking about how impressive Arthur is. Reynold says he has known Arthur as special ever since he awakened his mana at the age of 3, but that sounds unbelievable to Vincent since even the geniuses of this world only awaken mana around the age of 8. Although most geniuses don't blow up their house in the process. Reynold burst out in laughter when he recalls that incident, but maybe he laughed a little too hard because he ends up falling over in his chair. Just then, Vincent gets up and suggests that Arthur could enroll in the Xyros Academy. Reynold had never even considered something like that because Xyros Academy is an institution where mostly rich and influential mages attend. Tabitha agrees with Vincent and says they could even sponsor Arthur's tuition since someone as talented as him is bound to achieve great things in the future. Alice is hesitant to accept their offer since they've already helped them out a lot, and now they want to pay for Arthur's education as well. Not to mention the fact that Arthur is only 8 years old and the academy has an age limit of 10. Vincent says he already thought of that, and due to the nature of his work, he happens to know the director of the academy personally, so if he talks to her about it, he's sure he can get an exception for Arthur. However, before Vincent says anything more, Arthur speaks up and says it would be nice if they asked him for his opinion before deciding on something like this. Arthur just reunited with his family today, and he would like to spend some time with them before anyone talks about sending him away to school. He then excuses himself from the dinner table and starts walking through the halls, but he still isn't familiar with the layout of this house yet. Just then, Lilia calls out to him and warns that Arthur might get lost in the basement if he continues heading that way. She tells Arthur to follow her, and Arthur has nothing better to do right now, so he does so and is led to one of the break rooms where all the house servants gather. All the servants welcome Lilia since she often comes here whenever she has free time, and although Arthur just got here today, all of them know who he is because he burnt up the garden during his fight with Reynold earlier. Arthur apologizes for causing them trouble, but they aren't really mad about it. Lilia asks Maria if there's still any duck left over, and there is, but Maria warns Lilia to be careful how much she eats because she has been getting fat lately. One of the maids tells Arthur that Lilia often comes here when she gets stressed out. Her parents really want Lilia to awaken as a mage, so they've been making her go to lessons non-stop. Of course, Lilia also wants to become a mage, but the pressure still takes a toll on her, so she needs a break every now and then. Later that night, Arthur is spending some time with his parents, and they are still really excited to have their little Arthur back. He looks a lot different compared to the last time they saw him, but he's still the same person on the inside. It's great that with Arthur's talent, he's bound to become a great mage one day, but either way, his parents would still love him. They'd love to stay and talk more, but they are sure Arthur must be tired from a long day, so they get up and wish him a good night. But before they leave, Reynold wants to talk to him about what Vincent said earlier. It may seem like he is being pushy, but everything he said was with Arthur's best interest in mind, and no one expects him to go to the academy if he doesn't want to. The next morning, Arthur wakes up and rushes downstairs because he has guests who've come to see him. The members of Twin Horn heard that Arthur was back, so they came over to check on him. Arthur is happy to see them again, but Angela is even happier to see him because she pulls Arthur in for a big hug. Once Angela finally lets go of him, Arthur greets the other members of Twin Horn, but all of a sudden, Jasmine starts touching Arthur's body. It may seem weird, but she's just checking to make sure Arthur didn't suffer any permanent injuries, and once she's sure that he's okay, she hugs him and apologizes for what happened. She blames herself for not being able to protect Arthur the day he got separated from everyone, so she's incredibly relieved to see that he made it out unscathed. A little while later, everyone settles down so they can catch up with each other, and Arthur is surprised to learn that the Twin Horns spent some time in the remote city of Estatine. They got a really lucrative job there, but they had to come back to the capital for a commission. Hearing about their travels made Arthur realize that he knows practically nothing of the kingdom of Sapin, let alone the continent of Dicathan. Becoming an adventurer would be a good way to learn about the world, but that would mean he'd have to leave his family again, and he's not sure if he wants to do that. A few days later, Arthur is back in his room training with his beast will, and he discovers that it grants him the power to freeze time, but at his current level, he can only keep time frozen for a few seconds, and it completely exhausts him every time he tries it. He is starting to wonder if it's really worth going through all this effort for a power he doesn't understand, but then he remembers that he is doing this so he can protect the people he cares about, so no matter how hard it is, he is going to continue training. But before that, he realizes that Sylvie really stinks, so he immediately takes her to the bath. Sylvie hates getting bathed, but Arthur refuses to let her violate his nostrils in this beautiful mansion. And speaking of the mansion, since the Helsty family owns such a luxurious home, he figures their auction house must be really profitable, but he doesn't know much about them. Arthur eventually finishes cleaning Sylvie, so he is drying her out on his bed, but then his family comes in and tells him it's his turn to get cleaned up. Arthur didn't really pay much attention to his appearance during his stay in the Elf Kingdom, so his mother takes him to her favorite hairdresser, and the hairdresser promises to make him look fabulous. He still pretty much looks the same, but his hair is a little shorter now, so everyone says he looks super cool. Arthur asks why they all suddenly took an interest in his appearance, so Tabitha tells him she was thinking about giving Arthur a tour of their auction house, but the Helsty auction house is so prestigious the members of the royal family often visit as guests, so they couldn't have him go in with his caveman's hair. Tabitha offers to show Arthur around Xyra's city since they're already here, and Ellie says she wants to tag along because she wants to hang out with her big brother. Lilia is a little jealous because before Arthur got back, Ellie would always hang out with her instead, but she also wants to spend time with Arthur, so she isn't too upset. The group spends the entire day together and are having fun playing a ring toss on a nearby statue, but while Arthur was minding his own business, a group of guys randomly decided to throw a ring in his head and then walk off. Arthur is really confused, so he asks Lilia if she knows what that was all about since those guys seemed really disrespectful. She explains that those were students of the Axiris Academy, and they act that way because with that uniform, everyone in town practically treats them like royalty. Arthur is disappointed because he didn't think he'd have to deal with snobby kids from the academy here, but he decides to just ignore it for now. A little while later, Arthur senses some interesting energy coming from a store, so he goes over to check it out, and his parents explain that this store sells beast cores. Arthur is stunned because he had no idea that beast cores could be bought and sold since he never saw it happen in the Elf Kingdom, but it's pretty common here in the Human Kingdom. Tabitha explained that beast cores can be used to increase a mage's strength, and if it has a beast will, it can cost up to 100 gold coins. To put it into perspective, that's enough money for Arthur's family to live comfortably for the next 250 years. Tabitha tells Arthur that the auction house is actually going to sell some beast cores later, so she can let him touch a core if he wants. Arthur appreciates the offer, but he isn't particularly interested since he's okay with the beast core he got from Sylvia. Just then, Lilia speaks up and asks her mother if she can get a beast core, but Tabitha firmly turns her down because simply getting a beast core isn't going to help her awaken as a mage, and besides, she thinks it's way too expensive for a kid like Lilia. Lilia keeps trying to convince her to buy a beast core for her, but Tabitha remains firm and says she's done talking about this. They then go to have lunch at a cafe, but Arthur can tell that Lilia is really upset about this. From the conversation earlier, he can tell that Tabitha doesn't want Lilia to rush her awakening, but Lilia seems impatient for some reason. He's about to ask her about it, but then he notices that Lilia is gone, and for some reason, even though Tabitha was sitting right next to her, she didn't say anything when her daughter got up and started walking into a dark alleyway. Arthur gets up to follow her and tracks Lilia down to a magic store. She is currently looking at one of the cheaper beast cores, and with her allowance, she could afford to buy this one for herself. But Arthur asks her if she's sure she wants to do that. Even if she gets a beast core, it doesn't mean she will suddenly be able to use magic, but Lilia says she won't know for sure until she tries it. She tries reaching for the beast core, but Arthur grabs her hand and tells her to wait because he doesn't think it's a good idea. However, Lilia doesn't want to hear it from Arthur because he could never understand how she feels when he's so special. She pulls herself away from Arthur, but in the process, she accidentally bumps into a boy behind her, and it turns out to be the Axiris students from earlier. She apologizes for bumping into him, but the guy's ego is too inflated to accept that it was just an honest mistake, so the boys plan to start a fight. The owner of the store hears all the commotion and comes out to see what's going on, but then he sees the Axiris Academy uniform, and he wants nothing to do with those brats, so he pretends he didn't see anything and goes back into his office. The Axiris boys now have free reign to do whatever they want, and the first thing that comes to mind is to burn Arthur and Lilia. Lilia runs behind Arthur for safety, and Arthur would like to resolve this peacefully. But these guys don't look like they are open to reason, so he prepares to wipe the floor with them. However, before the fight could start, Tabitha and Alice show up and demand that everyone dispel their magic immediately. The boys initially don't care about Tabitha and ask her if she thinks she is to stop them. The store owner even comes out and begs Tabitha not to anger the boys because they have the power to destroy the entire store if they want to. However, Tabitha tells them that even students of the academy won't be forgiven if they so much as touch the daughter of the Helsty family. As soon as the boys realize that Lilia is a member of the Helsty family, they start panicking because the Helsty family is one of the largest donors to the academy, so they definitely get expelled if the director were to find out. They quickly leave without causing any more trouble, but not before calling Lilia an incompetent trust fund baby. After that, everyone returns home, and once they arrive, they inform Vincent of what happened. He is shocked to find out that Arthur and Lilia nearly got into a fight with some students from the academy, but Tabitha was able to stop it before anything bad happened. Specifically, because Arthur might have killed those boys if she hadn't stepped in. Lilia apologizes for causing so much trouble, but Vincent tells her it's nothing to worry about. She didn't do anything wrong, and with all the donations he has made to the academy, an incident like this won't affect her chances of enrolling. He also tells Arthur that the same applies to him, but Lilia is so insecure that she thinks her father is saying he wants Arthur to enroll in the academy instead of her. Her parents try to reassure her that that's not what they are saying, but Lilia sees herself as a failure for not being able to use magic, so she believes her parents must also think she's a failure. She yells that she hates both of them and runs off, leaving them really confused. A few hours later, it's time for dinner, so Arthur goes to call Lilia down, but he finds out that she's not in her room. When Lilia was young, Vincent would often tell her stories about the academy, so Lilia was always looking forward to it, and that made her impatient. However, she wouldn't be able to enroll until she awakened her mana, but it has taken longer than expected. Her parents always told her that there's no need to rush it, but then she saw Arthur having mastered magic at such a young age, and it made her feel insignificant. Arthur eventually finds her sitting in the staff break room by herself, and he wants to say something to cheer her up, but he doesn't want it to seem like he is looking down on her, so he isn't sure how to approach this. However, before Arthur could say anything, Lilia apologizes for being jealous of him. After Arthur demonstrated his power, he earned all of her father's attention, but she doesn't blame him because it's her own fault for being so incompetent. She really thinks her parents are disappointed in her, and Arthur understands the feelings of self-doubt that must be racing through her mind, so he grabs her face and tells her she isn't a disappointment. He can tell that she's been working hard, and her parents understand that as well. Arthur is sure that they are very proud of her, so the fact that an anomaly like him showed up won't change that. Lilia laughs because she now realizes how silly she was being. Her father wants her to become a mage so she can be happy, which is why he has been donating so much money to ensure that she gets enrolled at the academy. She understands that her parents don't want her to push herself too hard, but the more Vincent does to secure Lilia's position, the more others will look down on her as a spoiled child, so Arthur wants to help her out. He asks her if she really wants to be able to use magic, because if so, he knows of a method to speed things up. A few hours later, Arthur tells Lilia's parents that she left the house and they are caught off guard, so they ask him to explain. Arthur tells them that he sent Lilia to do some training so she can awaken her magic, but in case they are worried, he assures them that the people he sent Lilia to are really nice. Vincent and Tabitha asks him why he would send Lilia away without getting their permission first, but Arthur tells them Lilia is the one who wanted it to be this way. If she had talked to her parents before leaving, then her resolve would have wavered, but she did leave a letter behind for them, so Arthur hands it to Vincent. The letter explains how Lilia has always felt useless because she couldn't use magic, so no matter how many years it takes, she's going to train hard to become an amazing mage. However, until then she isn't going to return home, so she tells her parents to take care of themselves. Vincent falls to his knees in despair because he realizes this is all his fault. He is the one who reinforced the idea that Lilia needed to become a mage to be happy. In truth, whether she can use magic or not, she will always be his daughter, so he could never think of her as useless. After Vincent says this, Arthur tells Lilia that it's time to come out, and to Vincent's surprise, she was hiding behind the door the entire time. Vincent asks what's going on here, so first, Arthur apologizes for tricking them. He knows how devastating it can be to think your child has suddenly disappeared, so he is truly sorry for putting them through that, but he did it to prove to Lilia that her parents would love her regardless of whether she could use magic or not. Vincent understands why Arthur did it, so he isn't upset, and in fact, he now realizes how wrong he has been. So he goes up to Reynold and Alice and apologizes to them for trying to send Arthur to the academy when he just returned home. He also wants to apologize to Lilia for practically forcing her to become a mage. He tells her she doesn't need to go to the academy and she doesn't need to become a mage to live a happy life, so she's free to do whatever she wants. Lilia appreciates it, but she tells her father that she still wants to attend the academy even if it takes her a few extra years to awaken her magic. She says she wants to become a mage who can use magic to make others happy, and if she's sure that's what she wants, Arthur says he will awaken her magic for her. Since he's going to awaken Lilia's mana, he decides to do the same for Ellie too, so both of them sit in the middle of the room. He tells them that the first step is to take deep breaths and exhale slowly with their eyes closed so they can sense their mana. Ellie is able to sense it right away, but Lilia is still not feeling anything yet. She wonders if she just doesn't have any talent for magic, but Arthur tells her she just needs to keep at it. He then places his hand on Ellie and Lilia's back and warns them that he's about to stimulate their mana, so they might feel a little heat. Once Arthur completes the process, Lilia begins to see glowing lights, meaning her mana has finally awakened and she couldn't be happier. Later on, Arthur and his family are invited to the Helsty auction house, and they are amazed by how huge the place looks. Alice is worried she might not be cut out for an event as fancy as this, but Tabitha assures her that it's fine and they should just enjoy their night. Tonight's auction is something that adventurers and aristocrats alike have been looking forward to, because it's a rare chance to buy rare items collected by Vincent. Such rare items include magic beast cores and expensive foreign statues, so security here is really tight, and Reynold is the one in charge of all the security guards. Once the auction begins, Vincent steps out on stage and announces that they have some special guests with them tonight. The royal family of the Kingdom of Sapin, King Brian, Queen Priscilla, and the young prince and princess Curtis and Kathleen. Everyone cheers for the royal family, so Arthur assumes they must be good rulers for the people to like them so much. With the royal family present, Reynold and the rest of the guards are on high alert to make sure nothing goes wrong. Meanwhile, inside, Vincent begins the auction with the first item. It is a blade that was forged by a famous craftsman, so mana has been added to the blade to make electricity flow through the tip. The starting bid for the sword is 50 gold coins, but one of the auction members immediately bids 51 on it. While people bid over each other, Arthur wonders if it would be possible for him to add an element to a weapon if it is suitable. Just then, he notices Vincent bringing in a pair of masks, and Arthur seems rather interested in them. But then he notices that Sylvie is missing. He thought she was playing with Lilia or Ellie at first, but then he sees them sleeping over there, so he gets up to go look for her. Meanwhile, Sylvie is walking through the auction house halls without a care in the world, but all of a sudden, she is stopped by the mage that came with the royal family. Back on stage, Vincent brings out the next auction item and informs everyone that this is an A-rank lion cub. As soon as he sees it, Prince Curtis tells his father he wants one. So once the bidding starts, the king immediately offers 1,000 gold coins for it. Of course, no one is going to try to outbid the king, so the lion cub is sold to him without delay. The king comes up onto the stage to claim the cub, and Vincent asks him what he plans to do with it. The king tells him he could tame the cub for himself, but Curtis said he wanted to become a beast tamer, so the king plans to hand it over to him. At the same time, Arthur is busy looking for Sylvie when he hears her scream coming from down the hall. He runs over and finds the mage looking at Sylvie, and he immediately recognizes him as the one who came with the royal family, so he would like to avoid causing trouble here. He politely asks the mage to let Sylvie go since she's his mana beast, and the mage is disappointed to hear that since he thought she was one of the auction items. Sylvie runs over to Arthur's side and Arthur is about to leave, but the mage says he is still interested in Sylvie and he has been meaning to get a mana beast for himself, so he demands that Arthur hands Sylvie over. Arthur looks at him like he's stupid and asks what makes the mage think he would do such a thing. But rather than just accept the fact that Arthur isn't willing to give Sylvie up, the mage proceeds to blast fire at Arthur to intimidate him and says this is an order from a royal mage, but Arthur remains unfazed and decides to walk. However, this only makes the mage even more angry, so he threatens to make Arthur's parents pay for this. And while Arthur is willing to ignore threats made against him, he will not tolerate threats made against his family. He turns around and dares the mage to say that again. While releasing terrifying amounts of murderous intent, however, he must have forgotten that he's in Vincent's auction house. His murderous intent spreads over the entire auction house, shattering all the windows at once. And while those with mana like the king are able to withstand it, those without, like Vincent, are immediately incapacitated. The king rushes to check on Vincent, and the royal guards surround the king because they assume the murderous intent must be coming from an intruder. The king tells them that he can handle himself, so they should focus on protecting the others here and capturing the intruder. Arthur soon realizes what he has just done, and while he may have succeeded in scaring the royal mage, he knows he just caused a whole lot of trouble. He dispels his murderous intent, but the damage is done as everyone is now in a panic. No one knows what's really going on, so Reynold orders everyone to evacuate for the time being until he can get this all sorted out. As a result of the incident, once everyone has been evacuated, the king asks to speak with Reynold in private. He wants to address Reynold's failure to capture the culprit in time, and Reynold sincerely apologizes, but unfortunately, the king says he must be punished. Reynold is willing to accept whatever punishment the king sees fit, but before King Brian can make any judgments, the royal mage speaks up and asks him to consider forgiving Reynold since there were no casualties. However, the mage isn't doing this just to be nice, and he makes that clear by commenting on how nice Arthur's mana beast looks. The king introduces everyone to Sebastian and tells them that he's a mage serving as security for the royal family. Sebastian has saved the king's life countless times, so the king thinks quite highly of him. And when he heard Sebastian say he was interested in Arthur's mana beast, he asks Reynold if he would be willing to give it to Sebastian as thanks for his consideration. Arthur tries to speak up, but Alice stops him because it is rude to talk out of turn to a royal like that. Reynold then responds to the king's request and tells him he can't agree because Arthur acquired Sylvie on his own, so Reynold has no right to give her away to someone else. In that case, the king then decides to ask Arthur directly, so he turns to him and asks if Arthur would be willing to give Sylvie to Sebastian, but Arthur politely declines because nothing could ever replace Sylvie. The king then offers to trade the world lion he just bought in exchange for Sylvie, claiming that while Arthur's mana beast seems rare, the lion should still be worth more. But once again, Arthur refuses and tells the king that he does not intend to give away, sell, or trade Sylvie for any reason. The king is starting to grow impatient and tells Arthur that he has already asked him twice and a king shouldn't have to repeat a request. He asks Arthur one last time to give up his mana beast, but the king's persistence is starting to get on Arthur's nerves, so he gets up and asks the king if he would be willing to sell his children. Hearing this stuns the king so much that he doesn't know what to say, but Arthur continues and reminds the king that he has already turned down his request 3 times already, yet he refuses to accept that some things are so precious that they aren't for sale. So he wants to know how the king would respond if someone came up to him and demanded to buy his children. The guards immediately run forward to attack Arthur for disrespecting the king, but Arthur is easily able to knock both of them out with 1 punch each. Sebastian calls the knights fools for failing to kill one small child, and he wants to acquire Sylvie at all costs, so he fires a spell to hopefully burn Arthur to death. However, Arthur activates his static world ability and freezes time for everyone except Sebastian. Sebastian is confused and wonders why everyone stopped moving, but Arthur tells him none of them can hear a word he says. He then begins walking over to Sebastian slowly, and Sebastian tries to get him to stay back by telling Arthur he can win against a royal mage. But in response, Arthur simply snaps one of Sebastian's legs. He starts calling out for help, but Arthur tells him no one can save him here, so he had better listen to what Arthur has to say while he still has functional ears. Arthur warns him to know his place and be careful about who he threatens, because next time things will be much worse for him. A few seconds later, the static world fades, so time returns to normal and Arthur passes out from all the exertion. A little while later, Arthur wakes up in his bed with a massive headache, but at least he's not in prison or something. He realizes he may have gone overboard by using static world since he was able to successfully freeze time for a few moments, but it took a tremendous toll on his body. Just then, Alice comes in to check on Arthur, and she is relieved to see that he's finally awake. Arthur asks her to tell him what happened after he passed out, so Alice explains that everyone was shocked when Arthur suddenly collapsed, so she rushed to treat him. But it still took a long time for his body to recover. Since Arthur seems to be doing fine now, Alice asks him if he would like to go shopping with her, and Arthur agrees since he could use a change of scenery. While out, Arthur spots a hairpin which would look great on Ellie, but he still doesn't have any money, so Alice buys it for him and tells Arthur he can give it to Ellie as a gift later. She also offers to buy a gift for him as well, but Arthur asks if it's really okay for them to be spending so much money since Randall might have lost his job at the auction house. However, Alice tells him he doesn't have to worry about their family's finances because she has a job as well. Arthur had no idea of this, but apparently Alice makes luxury items, and they are quite popular among the nobility, so she makes a decent amount of profit so they can still afford to buy whatever they want. So much so that by the time their shopping trip is over, Arthur and Alice are carrying a bunch of bags. Once they return home, they overhear Reynold in the living room talking to someone and saying his silence can't be bought when his son was nearly killed. Arthur asks what's going, and as soon as Reynold sees him, he is relieved that Arthur is back on his feet. Arthur says there's no need to be so concerned about him since he's perfectly fine, and the man Reynold was talking to realizes that Arthur must be the boy from the incident, so he asks him to join them. He presents Arthur and Reynold with a bag of gold from the king as a small token of apology for the minor incident yesterday. But Arthur wouldn't exactly call being attacked by two knights and a royal mage minor. However, he decides to just be polite and thanks the messenger for coming all the way out here for this. The messenger is pleased to see that Arthur is being so understanding, so he assures him that the two guards who attacked him have been fired because the king would never want to kill a child over something as insignificant as refusing a request. Randall doesn't think merely being fired is enough of a punishment for the knights who tried to kill his son. But the messenger points out that Arthur was rude to the king after all, and the king was even kind enough to forgive Reynolds' negligence in protecting the auction house. So Reynolds shouldn't be upset about the guards getting some leniency as well. Reynolds was about to say something, but Arthur cuts him off and says there's no need to be angry since it was his fault for speaking out of line to begin with, and he managed to get out of it without any major injuries, so it doesn't bother him. But speaking of injuries, Arthur asks what happened to Sebastian since his leg was broken. The messenger explains that Sebastian was also fired for attacking Arthur, and is now receiving treatment at a hospital. He kept insisting that Arthur was the one who broke his leg, but that sounded absurd since no one saw Arthur do it and they were looking at him the entire time. Instead, the king believes the energy from Sebastian's spell must have backfired and broke his leg by accident. The king is greatly bereaved that something like this happened, which is why he is going on so far to render an apology. And while the messenger acknowledges that Arthur is a good kid with innate talent, he also warns him to be careful of how he speaks to people in positions of power, because not everyone is as forgiving as the king. Arthur and Reynold accept the apology, and after the messenger leaves, Reynold hands all the hush money over to Arthur. Arthur asks if he's sure he wants to give this to him, but Reynold thinks it's only fair since Arthur was the one who faced the danger. And besides, he's going to need money if he plans to do something in the future. Today was an extremely humbling experience for Arthur since while he may have been a king in his past life, here he is still nothing more than a child. He's going to need a way to counter political power, so he needs to acquire some political power of his own, and to do that, the next morning he meets with Goodsky, the Dean of the Magic Academy. This was the end of episode 10. Subscribe to not miss the next part.